sir.
So I'll start now.
Yes, sir.
See, today the topic is ward rounds. Why ward rounds is important for DNB is because there are 40 marks earmarked for that. Therefore, if the student can get around 30 marks in that, he will have an additional 10 marks because the DNB pass mainly is on the total uh, out of 300. If he gets 150, he can easily pass. Okay. Even if it's a virtual meeting, many of the things which are shown in virtual exams, many of the things that are shown will come to you as OSCEs. So the first thing is identify the splint. That may be the question in the OSCE. This is a Thomas splint, you all know. And the full name you have to write Thomas bed knee splint. It was originally described for the management of tuberculosis of the knee. So it was described by Hugh Owen Thomas. Hugh Owen Thomas described this in 1875, not 76, and he used as a knee appliance for the ambulant management of knee joint inflammation. So they may ask you regarding the angle here, the inner angle with the bar is around 120 degree. And how to measure the size of the ring? There is the oblique circumference of the thigh just below the gluteal fold plus 2 inches. 2 inches is for the swelling. And the length of the splint is usually measured from the crouch to the heel plus 6 inches. That is from here to the heel and another 6 inches. So this is how it is being applied. And the tapes are attached to the end of the splint. There is a small indentation here or a curve here, and this curve for tying the knots. Okay, and the usual thing that was described was the outer should be over the splint and inner should be under. This is just to keep the limb in sufficient external rotation, not allowing it to go to internal rotation or excessive external rotation. Then we can allow movements of the knee by using this Pearson's attachment. And some of the hospitals, especially if I remember correct, it was in Calcutta or in Lucknow, somewhere this Pearson's, this Balkan frame is there. And they can still ask you questions regarding that. It is again for multiple pulleys are there. It is for allowing a knee movement. And it can also be used for giving a sling, pelvic sling in the reduction of open book fractures of the pelvis. So in the Thomas splint, they may ask you regarding the history of Thomas splint. It is given in this article, Journal of Bone and Joint Surgery, 2009. How to take measurement, how to apply fixed and balanced traction, how to make it fixed, which I will tell you. The usual problem is that you cannot use it for a prolonged period because it will produce pressure over the ischium. And another question that may be asked is what is a Tobruk splint? Tobruk is a place in northern Africa where there was war between the Allied forces and the Germans. And during that time, the injured patients, especially with fracture, lower limb injuries, had to be transported for a long distance to UK. And what they did was applied a fixed traction in the Thomas splint, and then they applied plaster over that. Therefore, the limb was totally immobile, and this has saved a lot of lives because movement occurring to the fracture shaft of femur leads to fat embolism and ARDS. Therefore, this was prevented by using the Tobruk splint. So this can also be asked. So this is the article which I have been mentioning. And how to apply it as a fixed traction. You apply skin traction. You maintain reduction. Counter traction passes up the side of the bars to the padding. the strap should be from greater trochanter to the lateral malleolus. You all know that the lateral malleolus is slightly posterior and medial tibia is slightly anterior. Therefore, to apply this traction, you apply the tapes in line with the tibia on the medial side and in line with the fibula on the lateral side. And this will encourage sufficient, this will correct the rotation. And this was one that is commonly asked, what is this traction? And if you see a traction on the normal side like this, it is the Agnes Hunt traction or the well-leg traction. Where is it used? It was used for correcting flexion deformities. See, in many of the cases of tuberculosis with flexion deformity here what they are doing is to do something like a Thomas test by flexing the hip joint so that the lumbar lordosis is getting obliterated. Keep this limb in this position, then apply the Thomas splint and gradually give traction so that they can correct the fixed flexion deformity. So the other methods of traction are the skin traction, skeletal traction, tibial, upper tibial or lower tibial, lower femoral traction, trochanteric traction, calcaneal traction, pelvic traction, skull traction, and halter traction. So once you are going to a hospital for your DNB practical, you will be taken to a big ward like this or cubicles where there will be a patient with this type of traction. They will ask you to name the assembly that is an upper tibial traction given using a Bowler bone frame. The common indication for using that is usually it is the fracture shaft of femur. Trochanteric fracture was before surgery can be used for trochanteric fractures also. Then how many pulleys are there? In a Bowler bone frame, there are 4 pulleys and they will ask you which are the pulleys, what are the uses of these pulleys. See, this pulley here is for calcaneal traction. The lowest pulley is for calcaneal traction. This is for upper tibial traction. This is for lower femoral traction. And this is for preventing foot drop. Then they may ask you how to prevent foot drop. You apply a skin tape here and the tape goes over here and a small weight, half kg will be attached here. So it will keep the foot in the neutral position. That is how they prevent foot drop. These are the questions that are commonly asked. Then they may show one of these like this and what is wrong with it? It is going through a different pulley. So what is happening is that this traction is only lifting the leg but not giving any femoral traction. So they may ask you what type of traction is it. Once they elevate the foot end of the bed, the weight will be acting in this direction and the body weight will be pulling in the opposite direction. So this becomes a balanced traction. So why is the foot end elevated? It is for converting it into a balanced traction. How much to be elevated? How much weight is given? 2.5 for every 1 lb of the traction weight is the height of this block that is given here. How much weight can be added? It is usually 1/10 of the body weight. These are given in various textbooks. What is wrong here? It is given at a much lower level. So this comes to the landmark where the Steinman pin is applied. It is 2.5 centimeters below and lateral to the 1.25 centimeters below and lateral to the tibial tuberosity. It is applied from the lateral to the medial side in the upper tibia. Then they will ask you how will you apply the Steinman pin. So you should know how to anesthetize it, what type of incision that is used. Studies show that the cruciate incision is much better than a longitudinal or a transverse incision. Then after infiltrating local anesthetic even up to the periosteum, then you will have to put the Steinman pin usually using a hand drill. What is the pin that is used and how will you introduce the pin? These are the common questions that are asked. The pins that are used are either the Steinman pin or the Denham's pin. what are the indications? When the bone density is reasonably good, you can use the Steinman pin. And for osteoporotic fractures, you can use this Denham's pin because it has got thread in the middle. And this thread have got purchase in the bone and prevent loosening of the pin. Okay. So what is this apparatus that is used? This is called as the Bowler's stirrup. The Bowler's stirrup, what is the indication? It will fix the Steinman pin to the skeletal traction unit. And it attaches, it can be used for attaching weight to the unit, traction unit. And here you find there is a knob-like thing here. Inside there is a hole. This can freely rotate. So this can adjust the direction of the traction forces. So it will always go in line with that of the femur. Then they may ask you something regarding the history, because at least one question you can expect from the history of orthopedics. It may be a picture of John Charnley, or a picture of some other great person who has described something. So here, Lawrence Boda was born in Austria. He studied and he worked in the University of Vienna. So what are the contributions? Bowler's splint, Bowler's stirrup, Bowler's angle, you might have heard in the calcaneum. And he has written a book on treatment of fractures, which is considered to be one of the earliest books exclusively on fractures in 1929. Then this question I have heard being asked by several examiners, senior examiners, what is Charnley's traction unit? I think Kakatasat sir has also mentioned regarding this. This is, you incorporate this traction in a Belloni cast. It will prevent equinus. It will prevent pressure sores at the heel. The rotation of the foot and the distal fragment is avoided. There is less chance of lateral popliteal nerve injury, and ipsilateral tibial fracture can be treated conservatively. Nowadays, when there is an ipsilateral tibial fracture, it is called as a floating knee, and it is almost always treated surgically. Previously, it was treated by this method. What are the things? You are the resident in the ward, and the resident is asked to monitor. What are the things that you'll monitor? You look for pulsation, distal pulsation if possible, and ask the patient regarding paresthesia, pressure sores, pin tract, physiotherapy. And if you are planning to treat it by portable X-ray, it was previously treated like that. Then portable X-ray was necessary for monitoring the reduction, but nowadays every fracture shaft of femur is treated surgically, and therefore this indication is not there. Now the complications, it can produce distraction at the fracture site. So if there is a ligamentous injury to the knee, it can become worse because of the distraction. The pins definitely can introduce infection into the bone. It can produce nerve injuries, physeal injury in children. In children, how the traction is given by different methods. You use a K-wire, and K-wire, there are traction apparatus or K-wire traction units are there in many hospitals, but nowadays you can use an Elisaro half ring, which is equally good for this purpose. Then one complication that can occur is what is called as the frame knee. That is the genu recurvatum, because the tibial tuberosity apophysis is for the development is important, because that is a tongue-shaped apophysis that is coming down. Any damage to this apophysis can lead to genu recurvatum deformity. So when you are introducing the pin, if there is any damage to the apophysis in a child, it can produce growth arrest there and can lead to a genu recurvatum deformity, which is often called as the frame knee. The frame knee can also occur as a complication of prolonged immobilization in extension. It was first described during the treatment of tuberculosis in a splint in an extended position. Now, regarding the calcaneal traction, the landmark is 2 centimeters below and behind the lateral malleolus. Then in the lower femoral traction, it should be lined from the upper pole of the patella backwards and anterior border of the head of the fibula upwards, and the point where they intersect is taken as the point. Because the lateral popliteal nerve is on the lateral side, many people apply it from the lateral to the medial side. For the calcaneal traction, it is much better to put it from the medial to the lateral side, because the tibialis posterior neurovascular bundle is on the medial side. So the problem with this lower femoral traction is the stiffness due to fibrosis of the extensor mechanism. So the questions that are usually asked in this section on traction, skeletal traction, is that the name, the splint, and the parts which we have described. Then the uses of the pulleys, the 4 pulleys, you have to identify the pulleys and you have to tell the use of these pulleys. Then Bowler's contribution to orthopedics. Then fixed and ballast traction. Then technique of introduction of the steam and complications and prevention of complications, and care of the pin tract. What will you do every day to the pin tract? It should be cleaned daily, and usually no dressing is given to the pin tract. It is left open. Then the uses of a Denham spin and K-wire traction. These are the various things which you should know regarding skeletal traction. Now this is another traction that is usually given for neck pain and for the correction of torticollis. This is called as a halter traction. It has got a Buck's extension. This apparatus, they will ask you the name. This is called as a Buck's extension, and this is for guiding the traction in line with that of the neck. Okay, so the traction will be in line if you use this Buck's extension. And the next thing they will ask regarding the weight, you cannot give too much weight to this traction. The maximum traction is only weight can be used only around 5 to 10 pounds. That is around maximum is 5 kilograms. So it is used in the management of neck pain, and it is a simple type of traction which is used very commonly in your wards, because a patient comes with neck pain or torticollis. The first thing that you will do is to immobilize. It can be used only for a few hours at a time, because it is producing constant pressure to the chin, and it can produce pain in that area, and it can only be used. So you can it can be used. Intermittent traction can be used as an OP procedure, and there are sitting traction kits are available where you can use it even in your home. You can sit on a stool or a chair and attach this traction to the door. So this thing is available. This traction kits are available. Where so indications of skull traction are usually cervical spine injuries, and the common tongs that are used, you should be able to identify the common tongs that are used. Then you should have a general idea of how it is being applied, because now it is mainly the neurosurgeons who use this. The amount of weight, the precautions and complications, and regarding a few things regarding the halo traction. So one of the tongs that are used is called as the garden wells. The garden wells is a round thing like this with these bolts which are which you can screw it onto the outer table of the skull. So you should pierce only the outer table of the skull, and it should never pierce the inner table of the skull. While Crutchfield is a smaller one. Okay, so this is a smaller one. For applying the Crutchfield, there is this guarded drill bit which pierces and stops when you drill the outer cortex. And what's the landmark? Usually you draw the intermastoid line like this, and the center line here. The center should be here, and on either side, depending upon the type of tones which you are using, you can mark that area, infiltrate with the local anesthetic, and You can either use the guarded drill bit as in the case of Crutchfield tongs, or in the case of Gardenwell tongs, you don't need that, you can just screw it in. And in the case of cones, which is another type of commonly used tong, where you again use a guarded drill bit. Regarding the weight, this is what is given in Campbell, but the easiest thing to remember is 2.5 kg per head and 1.5 kg for each vertebra. So suppose it is the third vertebra, that is C3, for which C3 for which you are using it. So 2.5 plus 4.5. So 6 kg has to be used. That is how you calculate. 7 kg has to be used. The maximum that is can be applied is around 16 kg. 16 kg weight can be added for the reduction of cervical subluxations. Now, another type of traction that is being used is the Bryan's traction. The indications are usually for fracture shaft of femur, and there are several people who is using it for the management of DDH. That is the second indication. That's a modified Bryan's traction. It is usually used in children with fracture shaft of femur less than 18 months old, and in a child less than 15 kg. And there is one more 15, that is you have to elevate the buttocks around 15 centimeters from the port. So 15 months, 15 kg and 15 centimeters, okay. Complication that has been described is usually the vascular insufficiency. The vascular insufficiency is because the knee is kept extended. So when you apply the traction in this position 90 degree with the knee extended, it can produce vascular insufficiency, and this has been reported commonly in the normal side rather than the fractured side. This is the modified Bryan's traction that is used in the management of DDH, where every day you abduct the limb every day. I give traction and abduction till the hip is getting reduced. So these are things that can be asked regarding traction. Now we'll go into the next area, because once you go into the ward, there may be some crutches in the ward, and the examiner will take one of these pair of crutches and give it to you. So he will ask you what are the types of crutches. It can be either an axillary crutch, elbow crutch, or a gutter crutches. These are the three various types of crutches that are commonly used. How will you take the measurement of the axillary crutch? It is 5 centimeters below the anterior axillary fold. So it is usually 5 centimeters below the anterior axillary fold to around 15 centimeters in front and lateral to the little toe. Okay. Excuse me. 15 centimeters in front and lateral to the little toe. The hand grip should be at the level of the greater tuberosity, greater trochanter, sorry, and the elbow should be flexed 30 degrees. So the hand grip usually at the level of the greater trochanter, and the elbow is flexed 30 degrees. Then what are the types of crutch gait? That is another common question that is asked. It can be 2-point gait, where you can see you put if the right is the affected limb or the painful side, you put the right foot goes along with the left leg, right crutch goes along with the left leg. So you always put the unaffected side to the front. So right crutch, left leg, left crutch, and the right leg. So the painful leg comes last. Okay, that is what is called as the 2-point gait. Then comes the 4-point gait, 3-point gait, and swing to and swing through gait. These are the various types of crutch gaits. So in the case of 4-point gait, what you are doing is, if the right leg is the affected or the painful side, the right leg is the affected leg. So the right crutch first, left leg. So the right crutch, left leg, then left crutch, and last should be the affected leg. Okay. So that is the how you walk within a 4-point gait. And then 3-point gait is the next one, where 2 crutches and the injured leg forward. The 2 crutches and the injured leg. This is the flexed knee. One having the flexed knee is the affected or the painful side. So he is not putting weight on that limb. And 2 crutches and the injured leg forward, followed by the unaffected limb. Okay. Now swing to, you all know, is swing to the level of the crutches, and swing through means you can go to the front of the crutches. The only problem, because if you are not good in balancing, you may fall back. Okay. These are the various types of crutch gaited. What is a 2-point gait? What is a 3-point gait? What is a 4-point gait? What is a swing to and swing through gait? Now, how will you climb up and down stairs by using crutches? So always when you climb upwards, the good leg up. Always when you climb downstairs, the bad leg down. You should remember these two. The good leg up and the bad leg down. Okay? The good leg up and bad leg down. Now, they may ask regarding crutch palsy, that is due to the improper use of crutches. So, if you put too much pressure on the crutch, on the axillary pad, then you will have a problem, usually pressure on the radial nerve at the axilla, or it can be a part of the brachial plexus that will get affected. Regarding the walking stick, it is not commonly asked, but you should know what's the length of the walking stick you will prescribe. That is, the hand grip should be at the level of the wrist crease. The hand grip should be at the level of the wrist crease, and elbow should be at 30-degree flexion. Okay, that is, the tip should be 4 inches from the lateral border of the foot. So this is 4 inches from the lateral border of the 3 things. The wrist should be at the level, hand grip should be at the level of the wrist. The elbow flexed 30 degrees, and the tip should be 4 inches away from the lateral border of the foot. Now coming to the dressing trolleys, because these types of trolleys and even modern ones will be available in the ward. Nowadays, most of us are using these pre-packed trays instead of using the trolleys. But there are several hospitals, big hospitals, where this trolley is still being used, and therefore this can again be asked. So this equipment, what are the equipments in the trolley? In the top shelf, you remember maybe that these are sterile things and clean things that are kept on the upper part. And then in the bottom shelf, it is mainly the drum containing bandages and Gamgee pads. It is the drum that is kept. Then drugs, antiseptic solutions, and then all the unsterile things. The kidney tray for dirty instruments, receiver for using towels, and receiver for using swabs. These are the ones that are in the bottom shelf. Okay. Then they will show one of these bins which are commonly present in the ward, and then they may ask you how it is being autoclaved. You will say that it is the steam that is used for autoclaving these bins. Then they will ask you where the holes are. So you should tell that there is a lock here. You have to unlock it, and then the holes will appear. And then you autoclave it. And once you take it out of the autoclave, you close it. And in the ward, you will not reopen this lock. Then another instrument is the Cheadle's forceps, which is always there. So it should be autoclaved daily, storing it in an alcoholic solution of Savalon. And how often you will change Savalon? It should be changed at least every day. So this is some studies suggest that the glutaraldehyde is better than Savalon for keeping these Cheadle's forceps. In some hospitals, they don't use any solutions. They keep it in a sterile bottle. So the most important thing is in most of the hospitals, they are kept in bottles with a small mouth. It should never be stored in bottles with a small mouth. As you can see here, I think it is one picture is somewhere here. Yeah, see, this type of bottles are commonly used in many hospitals. Therefore, when you introduce the cheetal forceps inside and take it out, it will touch the edges and it becomes unsterile. So you should not use this type of bottles for keeping that. And again, cheetal forceps is considered as a surgeon's enemy, and it is no longer used nowadays. It is used only in certain hospitals where it is not practical to use autoclave trays, because in a government hospital there may be around 120 patients, of which 60 or 70 may require dressings every day. So you cannot make 70 pre-sterile dressing trays. So then there is no other way but to use these type of dressing trolleys. Then they will show one of these GAMG pads, ask you how this name GAMG came. It was described by Dr. Joseph Sampson Gamgee in 1880. It is a thick layer of absorbent cotton wool with between two layers of gauze. Okay. Then spirit will be there. What is spirit? It is 70% alcohol. It acts by dissolving the cell membranes, proteins, denaturation and dehydration of the cells due to evaporation. It is a bacteriostatic antiseptic, mild rubrication counter-irritant when used on the excoriated skin. The main thing you have to know is 70% alcohol. Even in against viruses, COVID-19, they always advise 70% alcohol. Your sanitizer should contain 70% alcohol. If it is less, that is not effective. That is why uh, uh, alcoholic drinks which contain only around 40% alcohol, even without dilution, cannot be used for this purpose. So it is a broad spectrum antibacterial. It has got broad spectrum antibacterial activity against fungi, bacteria, viruses, but it is not acting against spores. Then another is Savalon, which is commonly present in the ward. They will ask you what is the composition. It is chlorhexidine plus cetrimide, and tartrazine is added to, which gives the yellow color. It is a germicide. While you have seen that alcohol is a bacteriostatic, here it is bactericidal, and it has got detergent properties also. The dilution that is commonly used is 1 in 30, which you should remember. And it is for cleaning and disinfection of physically dirty wounds where extra detergents are required. So detergents are useful in cleaning wounds, and that is why Savalon is commonly used. The problem with Savalon is some organisms can grow in the Savalon, especially the Pseudomonas. Then Sidex is the one that is used for cleaning instruments, and it is activated glutaraldehyde solution. It is a broad spectrum activity against bacteria and including their spores, fungi, and viruses. But the problem is it is noxious and irritating to the tissues, and hence thorough rinsing of all exposed material is mandatory. Suppose you are putting one instrument in Sidex and taking it out, it should be thoroughly washed with saline before it is being used. It can produce pseudomembranous laryngitis. So if tracheal tubes are put in this solution of Sidex. Then another common question that is asked is regarding Usol. Usol is the name of Usol. Usol is Edinburgh University solution. The composition is common asked: 1.25 grams of boric acid and 1.2 grams of bleaching powder with sterile water. Usol is prepared and used fresh every day. Mechanism, it releases nascent questions. So therefore in your MCQ, this solution will be there, Usol will be there, full name of Usol, composition of Usol, how often it should be prepared, or how long you can save this. It should not be saved for more than 24 hours, and there should be facility for making it in your pharmacy, and the mechanism it releases nascent chlorine. These may be the 4 questions in your OSCE. So the users can also be asked to separate slough from infected wounds, but sores, ulcers, and burns. So it usually is a desloughing agent. It is acidic in pH and therefore it's active against Pseudomonas. So hydrogen peroxide, the composition is 20 volumes of hydrogen peroxide. So 1 volume hydrogen peroxide releases 20 volumes of nascent oxygen. So previously we saw Usol releases nascent chlorine. Here it is the nascent oxygen that is produced. The effect is because of the release of nascent oxygen. It is effective bactericidal, fungicidal, virucidal, and sporicidal. And 0.5% accelerated hydrogen peroxide is demonstrated to be have bactericidal and virucidal activity in 1 minute. And against mycobacterium as well as fungus, the activity starts in 5 minutes. So it destroys anaerobic organisms. So the main use is for against anaerobic organisms. And it produces frothing and thus brings out debris from the depth of the wound. It produces heat on the tissues of contact, thus prevents capillary using, hence used as a hemostatic agent. Previously, it was used in preparing femoral canal and acetabulum during total replacement, but nowadays it is not commonly used. But it is still being used after curating of cavities in giant cell tumors. It is used for removing blood stains from the clothing. So the main things are anaerobic organisms, you have to remember. So it can be used as a desloughing agent because of the frothing properties, hemostatic agent, and for removing blood stains from the clothing. Then betadine is one of the most popular solutions that we use in everyday life in the hospital. It is nothing but povidone iodine. What's the concentration? So 3 strengths are available: 5%, 10%, and the surgical strength scrub is 7.5%. It has got germicidal properties against bacteria, virus, fungi, protozoa, and yeast. Iodine has got several disadvantages. Previously, it was iodine that was used for this purpose. It has got several disadvantages. So it is mainly insolubility, instability, and irritant and staining properties. 4 things. It was unstable, it was not soluble, it was irritant, and it had staining properties. So these undesirable qualities of iodine was eliminated by adding polyvinyl pyrrolidone or povidone, which is an organic polymer, which is water soluble. So combination leads to a complex formation, polyvinyl pyrrolidone iodine or povidone iodine, having bactericidal activities of iodine without any of the other bad effects, like insolubility, it becomes water soluble; instability, it becomes very stable; it becomes less irritant, and it has got less staining properties. Then another thing that can be asked is plaster of Paris, which all of you are using every day. Then they may ask you why it is called as plaster of Paris. That is because gypsum was extensively mined from a town called Montmartre in Paris, or you can say Paris. Who described this? It was Antonius Mathisen. You remember one name, and Nikolai Ivanovich Pirogov in 1850s, who used this material for orthopedic use. Chemical formula, it is calcium sulfate hemihydrate, and plaster of Paris is prepared by heating gypsum to 120 degree centigrade. Then there may be at least one patient in the ward with a long arm cast like this. Then they can ask about plaster of Paris. Then the next question they may ask how many layers for making a slab in the upper limb. Usually it is 8-layer slab for the upper limb and 12 layers for the lower limb. Then they will ask you regarding this long leg cast, what is the extent of a long arm cast, extent of a long arm cast. It is from the proximal extent is just below the deltoid insertion, and the distal should be up to the knuckle of the hand dorsally, and distal palmar crease volarly. So what you see here, it should be stop at the distal palmar crease on the volar aspect. Otherwise, the flexion of the fingers will be affected. This leads to stiffness of the fingers. Then cylinder cast, leg cylinder cast is another one which is commonly used in the treatment of fractures of the patella and knee injuries. They will ask you what are the problems associated with that. Because it is extending only up to this area, it produces constant pressure over the tendo Achilles. And any ulcer that develop in that area, it is very difficult to heal these ulcers. Then BK casts and Ebony casts are commonly there in the ward. This is a below knee cast. The extent is 2 centimeters below the tibial tuberosity and distal to the metatarsophalangeal joint. The problem is usually the angle in this cast, you can see the angle is in plantar flexion and in varus. Okay. This can lead to equinus after removal of plaster. So if you are keeping it for a prolonged period, if a BK cast or an AK cast is given with the angle in equinus for a prolonged period, it will produce equinus deformity, which is difficult to correct. Then the examiner will ask you what is the reason for that. Mainly it is an anatomical reason, because the anterior part of the talus is wider compared to the posterior part of the talus. Therefore, in dorsiflexion, it is the anterior part that is coming into contact in the angle mortis. Once it is in equinus, it is the narrow posterior part. Therefore, there will be narrowing of the tibiofibular syndesmosis. So once you dorsiflex it, the wide anterior part cannot engage that area. That is why it produces fixed equinus deformities. So you should remember this point, the talus is wider anterior compared to the posterior aspect. Okay. Is there any indication where you will use a cast in equinus? Yes, in some indications you have to use it. The fracture where it is used is mainly the neck of the talus fracture, because the mechanism of injury is in a neck of talus fracture is dorsiflexion. Therefore, you have, for reducing that, you have to keep in plantar flexion. The second indication is in the tendo Achilles injuries, in the management of tendo Achilles injuries. Then long leg cast, the common thing that is asked is, why do you want to keep the knee flexed? Okay, this is the extent, and why do you want to keep it flexed? This is mainly because you want to prevent the rotational movement of the body being transmitted to the limb. So once, if it is kept extended, the rotational movement of the body will be transmitted downwards, and this can produce rotational movement at the fracture site. Now coming to the hip spica, this is another thing. If it is present, it can be asked. So the common indication are fracture shaft of femur in a child, usually an young child below 5 years, and in DDH. These are the two main indications where this hip spica is commonly used. It can be a unilateral spica, bilateral spica. Okay. And the extent of the spica is from the nipple line to the toes. And they may ask you in a small child, say 1.5-year-old child with fracture shaft of femur, what type of spica will you use? You use what is called as a sitting spica, because you will keep the knee and hip flexed, because then only the mother will be able to carry the child in their lap. So that is what is called as a sitting spica. Then they may ask regarding the cast syndrome. It is the obstruction of the third portion of the duodenum by the superior mesenteric artery, leading to high intestinal obstruction. Okay, it occurs following spinal surgery. If you put a cast in hip spicas and other body casts, spinal jackets. The symptoms are usually abdominal pain, distension, vomiting, following the application of the cast. The precaution that you have to use is in all cases having a cast in hyperextension, whether it is a spinal jacket that is done for a fractured spine or a spica that is given, you admit the patient at least and observe them for at least 24 hours. In the evening, ask your residents to palpate the abdomen and see whether there is any abdominal distension or loss of bowel sounds. Another thing is that can be asked is some people make a small hole in the front of the spica in the region of the umbilicus. It is often called as the dinner pad. They may ask you what is the why do you want this dinner pad? You should not say that it is for taking food. It is mainly because these children are discharged to far off areas. And suppose the child develop abdominal pain, the surgeon there will have to palpate the abdomen and auscultate the abdomen. That is the reason why you are giving this dinner pad. So this is, you all know this. So it is a Ponseti cast. Indication, clubfoot, and the steps in the correction you should know. It is the cavus, then adduction, equinus is corrected by TA tenotomy. And how is heel varus corrected? That is a common question that is asked. Then you have to say regarding the calcaneopedal block, because Ponseti considers that the foot is made up of only two components. One is the talus and the second is all the other bones, including the calcaneum as the second block. So that is what is called as the calcaneopedal block. Once you correct the calcaneopedal block, once you abduct it, the heel varus automatically get corrected. And then they may ask you what is reverse Ponseti cast. It was described by Matthew Dobbs for the management of congenital vertical talus. So the steps here are mainly, the first thing is you have to palpate the talus, which is usually on the posteromedial aspect. Head of the talus in a vertical talus is usually on the posteromedial side. You give gentle pressure upwards and laterally, and then you plantar flex and invert the forefoot over the head of the talus. Then you can reduce this talonavicular dislocation, and you put the plaster in extreme clubfoot position. Okay. And the second thing is, in all these cases, you will have to do a tenotomy, as in the case of clubfoot. And a surgery is again necessary. That is either a percutaneous K-wire fixation of the talonavicular joint or a mini open procedure to reduce and fix the talonavicular joint. That is the additional procedure. It doesn't end with plaster and tenotomy, but it also involves fixation of the talonavicular joint by the K-wire, either closed or open, in Dobbs reverse Ponseti technique. Then only after fixing the talonavicular joint, you should do the tenotomy. These are a few things which you should know. Then the kites technique and the difference between kite and Ponseti technique can also be asked. So this is a Steenbeek brace. It is used after tenotomy for in the brace treatment of clubfoot. So the characteristics of the brace, it doesn't have any heel. It has got a low toe box. It has got a straight medial border. It is made of surgical shoes and a hole here for the mother to see the heel. These are 4 or 5 characteristics. And it has got a connecting rod, and this connecting rod should be placed at the level at the shoulder level. So the shoes should be at the shoulder level, and the foot should be rotated 70 degree in bilateral cases and 50 degree in unilateral case. In unilateral cases, the normal should be 50 degree. But you should understand that as the age increases, the amount of external abduction decreases in every child, and you have to subsequently reduce the amount of abduction that is required. Because Ponseti's case, when Ponseti did his clubfoot cases, they were all done in neonates and very small infants. What we are getting is children at the age of 6 months, 8 months, and 1 year. So you should not expect to get 70 degree external rotation in these cases. The bracing protocol is again asked. It is 23 hours a day for the first 3 months, followed by nighttime and nap time bracing up to the 4 years. And the problem with this bracing is if the parents fail to use the brace, recurrence occurs in almost all cases. This is one thing which is not used nowadays. It is a weaker rotation shock in the historical treatment of trochanteric fractures. Then scaphoid cast is, again, if it is there in the ward, they can ask, or a picture can be given. The position of the wrist is in dorsiflexion. It is called as the glass holding position. Radial deviation of the wrist, and the extent is usually from below the elbow crease, the knuckle dorsally, distal volar crease volarly, and up to the PIP joint of the thumb. So up to the PIP joint here, distal volar crease, dorsally up to the knuckle, and below the elbow crease. So this is another type of plaster that is commonly used for the management of fractured tibia. It is called as the patellar tendon bearing cast. Who described this? It is Augusto Sarmiento who described this. It is otherwise called the functional cast bracing. The common indication is fracture both bones leg for the PTB cast, but femoral cast brace can also be used. Even humerus cast brace is also popular. So what you do is you mold the plaster of the tibial flare and the patellar tendon. The principle, it is a hydraulic container theory. What is the principle? If it is asked in your OSCE, you have to write hydraulic container theory. That is, this rigid fitting plaster makes the leg segment as a hydraulic column. So the weight will be transmitted through the hydraulic column. And as the fractures start uniting, more and more weight will be transmitted across the fracture site. Because the brain knows when to start weight bearing through that bone. Therefore, the more the fracture heals, the more weight will be transmitted across the fracture site. That is the principle of the PTB cast or functional cast bracing. Then modern plasters will be there. It can be kept for you, the fiberglass casting tape. The advantages, they are lightweight, they are strong, porous, and durable. And nowadays, polyester casts are also available because it has got better conformability and easy to cut with regular cast scissors into virtually any shape. It works for circular, rigid, semi-rigid casts, splints, and orthosis. So three-way stretch open knit polyester conforms to the body contours, and it is 100% radial use. And the most important advantage is it is washable. Therefore, you can take bath every day with this plaster. That is the main advantage of polyester casts. You may see one of these modified vacuum assisted closure in your ward. So the examiner may ask you, or in the OSCE may be asked, how does the vac act? These are the mechanisms. It reduces edema, it increases blood flow, it reduces bacterial colonization, it increases granulation tissue formation, and increases protein synthesis and cellular proliferation. So these are the main advantages of vac technique. Okay, and vac machines are available which can give the exact ideal pressure, or you can use the suction that is available in the ward for using this vac. The ideal pressure is around 80 to 120 or 130, minus 80 to minus 130 millimeters of mercury. The advantages, early healing of the wound and reduce inflammation. The disadvantage is hemorrhage can occur in some cases. Then antibiotic bead pouch technique. So this is used mainly in the treatment of infection as well as in the treatment of compound fractures. So you put antibiotic beads here and you seal this by using an opsite. Okay. So bead pouch, how it is being used. It is kept in the dead space and the wound is sealed. advantage is a high local antibiotic concentration without any systemic toxicity. It decreases infection rate in compound fractures. It can be also used after debridement of infected wounds. Then bins, I will not go into the details. You should all be thorough with this, which are the bins that are commonly used. I will not go into these details because all these things will be there in the ward. You can look up. So what is the yellow bin? What is the red bin before? What is the white bag? And what is the blue bag? Okay. Then closed suction drain or Romovac drain is another thing that can be asked. It will be there in the ward. How long will you keep it? 24 to 48 hours. It eliminates dead space. It prevents accumulation of fluid and blood. Evacuate the existing collection and reduces infection rate. Okay. Then catheters will be there. Foley's catheter, which size for males and which size for females. It is 14F for females and 16F for females. The next question always will be, what is this F? F stands for French gauge, French scale or French gauge. It is, the diameter is the French divided by 3. Suppose it is a 14 gauge, 14 divided by 3 is the diameter. Or French is equal to diameter into 3. Okay. Types of catheters, they may ask: external condom catheter, indwelling catheter, Foley's catheter, then silicone catheter is available. Then what is intermittent catheterization? All these you will have to read up. Okay. Then these are the common questions that is asked: how to introduce the catheter, how to inflate the balloon, how much fluid will you use to inflate the balloon. Usually it is written in the here. In all the catheters, it will be written here how much fluid has to be used. How to remove the catheter. If it is not coming, what will you do? Other urinary catheters, silicone, PVC or K90 catheter, which is mainly used for this intermittent catheterization in spinal injury patients. The Malicote's catheters, self-intermittent catheterization, all these can be asked. Okay. Okay. Then pressure sore may be there. How is it produced? It is produced, prolonged pressure leads to ischemia and necrosis. What is the mechanism? Mechanism is compression, prolonged compression, shear, and friction. Then classification of pressure sores you should study. These are the ones, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, and grade 4. These are available in textbooks. Then how will you prevent pressure sores? Avoid prolonged pressure, avoid friction and shear, because it is pressure, friction, shear. These are the 3 things that leads to production of the pressure sores. So you should avoid that. So you frequently change position, and you can use proper beds. Air bed or water beds are available. The skin care, always keep it dry and clean. Good nutrition and hydration for the patients, and the medical condition like diabetes should be looked into and treated. How will you treat it? Cleaning and dressing. Debridement. WAC dressings are extremely helpful because it can produce healthy granulation over the pressure source. After that, you can put either a skin graft, and many cases you can use in the ischial area, you can use a tensor fasciae flap or a gluteus maximus flap. So many flaps are available in that area for closing the pressure source. This is chest tube with intercostal drain. You should know indications are for chest injuries following thoracostomy. And another question that is commonly asked: what is flail chest and what is Stauin chest, which you should read. Stauin chest is the collapse of a segment of the chest wall, while flail chest is a segment of the rib cage breaks and become detached from the rest of the chest wall. So in these cases, when there is a flail chest, it produces what is called as the paradoxical breathing. That is, when you inspire, usually the chest wall expands, but that segment which is flail usually will be sucked in. So the paradoxical breathing is the peculiarity. How to introduce the chest tube? That the landmark you should know. The precaution in transporting the patient. Whenever you transport the patient, you should clamp the tube, otherwise the whole fluid will go into the chest. When to remove it? When the daily drain is less than 50 ml. Okay. So these are the few things that can be asked. The next, I got a lot of slides here that is mainly regarding external fixators, which I am not going to continue mainly because we had an excellent talk from Jagadish regarding this. Okay. I think that is all I want.